I'm really excited today to talk with Solomon Friedman and Miss Sarah Bain. They are both partners of Ethical Capital Partners. So Sarah Bain is the VP of Public Engagement. Solomon Friedman is the VP of Compliance. Today, we're going to have a discussion about the online safety practices of their platforms specific to the adult entertainment industry and how we can safeguard children, the real problems and the real solutions. My name is Kim Kelley. I'm the co-founder of Uniting America, Inc. I'm also a survivor of child trafficking and all forms of abuse. I'm also a very vocal advocate for child safety and the real solutions that can protect children, both short and long term. So I'm really been looking forward to this discussion, and I want to welcome you both and thank you both for this dialogue, because I know we're going to attain many solutions together and educate people on the solutions you guys have already been working for.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Kelley, for having us.
Do you guys want to give just a brief introduction about yourselves, but more specifically your involvement? What brings you to this space in the adult entertainment industry?
Kim, again, thank you so much for having us on. We've had some time now to meet, get to know each other, both your team and our team. So this is such a wonderful opportunity for us. I'll get into who we are, but also just this sort of opportunity is really important for us because so rarely do we get to reach out to audiences that are your audience. So first of all, thanks so much. So just very quickly, my name is Sarah Bain. I am VP Public Engagement at Ethical Capital Partners. And how I came to this company and the work that we're doing is that my background is in government relations and public engagement. So anything that has to do with the public wanting to influence or engage with government. So working on both the government side, but also with corporations to find a way to bring together those three very important groups, the public, companies, and the government, because they work and they must work very closely together. So that's how I came to this, and that's my background. But what's really important to me in this space is that I believe in bodily autonomy. I believe that individuals have the right to have access to legal work. Adults have the right to do legal work. And this is a really important space for me, because when something is protected by either by labor or by a government, constitutionally protected, I think that we need to ensure that those laborers, those adult laborers, are working safely, and that they have the same protections that anyone else who is doing legal work has access to. So that's how I came to this. It was an industry that I was interested in because I believe in that. So I'll just pass it over to my colleague, Saul.
Really, thanks so much for having us, Kim. When we got into this work and we founded Ethical Capital Partners, we really believe that more public dialogue is going to lead to a safer internet. That is, instead of people just sort of hiding in the shadows and hurling accusations and defenses back and forth, productive dialogue is what's required, because there are so many pieces to that puzzle of how to protect particularly young people on the internet. So like Sarah, I'm a partner at Ethical Capital Partners. We are the ownership group that acquired in March of 2023, 100% of the company that was then called MindGeek. MindGeek operates, among other platforms, PornHub. It's now named ALO, and we are the proud owners of that company. My role in specific as the Vice President of Compliance for the ownership group is to really support and assist the platform in its investments in trust and safety. And that means both trust and safety when it comes to making the platform as safe as it can possibly be, protecting the vulnerable on our platform, but also really serving as a conduit to the broader internet, to whether it's other adult platforms, social media, technology companies, government, law enforcement, so that we can share what we have learned, the lessons that we have learned about protecting users and visitors online, but also about sharing the technology that we've developed. I think Sarah may be in a similar boat, but I'll speak for myself when I say, if you would have asked me 10 years ago where I was going to end up 10 years hence, it would not have been in the ownership group of one of the largest adult companies in the world. I was a criminal lawyer, a law professor. Those are really my interests. But when we began examining the prospects of acquiring this company and looking at what it had built, it is really one of a kind online in terms of the work that it's doing to keep the platform safe. I think it's, definitely learned a lot of hard lessons, as much of the internet and the creator space have, but we're really in an exciting place to do things online when it comes to protecting the vulnerable that no one else has done, and that, we're of the view should be absolutely widespread and common. So, that being said, that's what brings us here.
That's why we're here. I hear you on that, and I will definitely agree that I never thought I would be working with you guys with this project. What I'm doing here is hoping to bridge the gap of not only the public's understanding of what is and is not the problem and then the solutions, but also assist in verifying if there are gaps that we can improve on. So when we met online, it was at first, to me, I was like, what? Pornhub? Weird. That's not my thing. Look, as an adult, not my thing, not my kink. I personally don't care what consenting adults do. As long as you're not hurting humans or animals, like, do you, free country. However, my fight is child exploitation. And as a survivor, I've witnessed many advocacy groups and very well-meaning individuals who have this fight to end the porn industry. Now, let me just pause right there, because once again, I'm not here to advocate for porn. I don't think it's necessarily healthy for a brain, and definitely not a developing brain. However, I am here to separate the conversation of adult entertainment and sexual expression from the topic of child exploitation, because those two things do not coincide. They should not. But as of now, they're being grouped together by well-meaning advocates who seem to not be very solutions-oriented when it comes to actually implementing solutions and having dialogue and bringing together the right people. So I know that even this discussion, I'm going to bear the brunt of backlash by well-meaning advocates, conservatives, and people who don't think I should have anything to do with your brand. And I understand where they're coming from. However, I'm here to challenge the narrative. I'm here to be fear-facing because, first of all, if they have a problem with me working with people who are not only advocating for the safety, but pledging to implement safeguards and even inviting me in, I haven't done this yet, but you have invited me in to look into and verify your trust and safety protocols. This discussion, we're going to unpack a lot of the allegations and the concerns, the confusion that I've heard, not only about the legal accusations and allegations, about the legislation changes, about your technological solutions and safeguards. We're here to really work towards solutions. So I want the audience to keep an open mind, no matter where they're coming from. There's no bias about the lifestyle, adult expression. My goal is to protect the innocent. In my mind, those are two very different conversations, and I don't see a lot of people effectively separating those things. So again, I appreciate you guys being willing to have this dialogue and even pledging to go above and beyond. Now, I've done a lot of research, not only in your interviews and podcasts and the information you've put out to the public. I know a lot of people haven't. But when I've asked different friends and even peers of mine who are also survivors of trafficking and all kinds of exploitation and abuse, the number one concern or perspective is that currently there is and has been child abuse content on your platforms. So I know there's content uploaded all the time, but I want to first talk about what is the verification and moderation process? How do you safeguard your platform? Can you explain the specific processes and technologies that PornHub, for example, uses to ensure that all the content is uploaded legally and ethically? And then how do you monitor the uploads to prevent the posting of exploitative or illegal content?
Yeah. Can I just first say, this is definitely an area that Solomon has been spending a lot of time really digging into. It is certainly his background. He understands and is an expert in this space. But since we've made the acquisition of ALO, he's really digged into this. So it's definitely a question for Saul, but I just want to jump in before Kim and say that, just to reiterate something that you mentioned, because some of your listeners might be hearing about us for the first time. And, as you said, Kim, we've known each other for some time now. We've tried to find ways to work together. And so I just wanted to say one thing before we get into this, just very, very clearly, that we acknowledge that there are harsh realities that exist in the world. And we acknowledge that those same harsh realities that exist in the world exist online. And our platforms are in an online world. And working with you, Kim, and having opportunities like this, but also just meeting with you and you asking those questions in advance, the time that we've been looking to find opportunities to work together, like asking really tough questions. So it may seem like we're fast forwarding into, getting to those questions really quickly, but just for the listeners, it's been a while now that we've been talking, because it's so important to us that we're not just, if you will, preaching to the converted, that we're not always just speaking to those who already understand what it is that we're doing, what we're trying to do. At its core, when we made the acquisition of this company, we committed to being transparent, to being open to meeting with stakeholders, regardless of what their background is. And because we think that there's a misconception of the online adult industry. And if we just simply keep on meeting with individuals that are in our space, that work in our environment, then it's really very narrow-sighted. And so I just wanted to add that Saul he's got so much to tell you, but I just wanted to give a little bit of context that, again, I'm repeating myself, but we're just so grateful, Kim, that you're giving us an opportunity to speak to an audience that may not have had an opportunity in the past to hear our side of the facts.
Oh, absolutely. And I want to let you speak, Solomon, but I just want to highlight what you said. It was important to me to first verify, are these guys legit? Because they say they care, but here's the thing. A lot of people say they care. A lot of people want to use the premise of looking good in order to enhance their public perception. I had to first ensure that you were actually legitimately caring for the right reasons, but ready to really walk me through the nitty-gritty and find solutions. So far, I've seen that in you, and I really appreciate that. And I look forward to a very detailed venture into, and I'm going to bring the public with me, into delving into your practices, verifying whether or not these allegations are true. And if there are gaps that we can improve, let's work together to improve them. So, Solomon, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think Kim, you really asked the right question, because you asked about procedure and technology. And it's really important to emphasize that even though we are a tech company and we have some incredible tech solutions, both those that we've developed ourselves and those that we use from third-party providers, technology is not enough in this. And what we've actually done is we've made a massive investment in people. So I just want to frame things. Who we are, what our company looks like, the company we acquired. So ALO is a company of roughly 1,400 employees, which you have to understand that is completely out of scale for the adult industry. That's a serious undertaking. And the reason why it is so out of scale is because of how seriously we take trust and safety. In fact, of those 1,400 employees, 20% work full-time in trust and safety. Like that's it. If you would ask, Twitter or Facebook, what are your trust and safety numbers? Like it's minuscule compared to that, and just in terms of proportion. So that's a massive investment in trust and safety. This cannot be done with technology alone. I'm going to talk about how it's powered by people, whether they're frontline moderators or identity verifiers, or all the way up to those developing policy, managing, and directing. So we put our money where our mouth is. It's a massive investment. It's not cheap to run a trust and safety program that I'm about to describe, but it is critical. And I'll say this, as the ownership group, we never for a moment would have contemplated buying this company if what I'm describing didn't exist, if it wasn't in place. It just would have had no interest to us, would not have been a platform that we could invest in. So let's talk about what that looks like. As of today, there is no content on any of our content sharing platforms that was not uploaded via the verified uploader program, sometimes also called the model program. That means that for every single uploader, we have verified their identity. How do we do that? So we verify their identity because by verifying someone's identity, you verify age, ID of course, but also consent. So in order to become eligible to upload content, we're not YouTube. You can't just create an account and start uploading content. You have to apply. And the first step of that application process is, of course, reviewing the terms of service, understanding what the site permits and does not permit, but then verifying your identity. We use a third-party provider for the first step of that identity verification called Yoti. They provide verification for governments around the world, for banks, insurance companies, car rental agencies, all sorts of major players. And what we require is a biometric scan of the uploader's face in motion to ensure that it's not a screenshot or a video of someone. Then government ID, not a screenshot, has to be real. And then the technology matches both. So we verify that you are a live person, a real person. We verify that you have government ID that matches the details you've submitted, and then that your face matches both of those. If you pass those checks, the application is then passed to one of our human moderators to confirm. And I want to underscore that. If you don't pass those checks, you don't move on. But if you pass that automated check, you then move on to a human moderator who is looking for other red flags. And we're looking at everything from the authenticity of the document, whether they're holograms. We have all these technology to help match that. But fundamentally, we're verifying identity. And I want to pause here for a moment to say, some of your listeners may be aware of that. A few months ago, AI generated deepfakes of Taylor Swift erupted like wildfire all over Twitter and other social media platforms, right? Those would never have passed even the most basic cursory review on our platform because, of course, we don't have Taylor Swift's biometric scan of her face and her ID. That would have been the end of anyone attempting to upload that. We'll get to uploads, but I'm just talking about verifying the identity of uploaders. So, something that people obviously are rightfully concerned. Deepfakes are an extraordinary concern, but that could never happen to that level. Obviously, would never get there because we don't have the ID documents of the individual depicted. So that's verifying the identity of the uploader. Let's move forward for a moment. If all those checks are passed, we verify you're a real person, you match your ID, you're over 18, you provide consent, etc., you are now eligible to attempt to upload content. And I use that word attempt to upload content very precisely because unlike YouTube or Facebook or Twitter or Reddit, you cannot just upload to the platform. You can attempt to upload, which means you submit a piece of content for moderation. Now, when you submit it for moderation, the following things happen. First, before it ever sees human eyes, that content is run through 10 different engines. We subscribe to every single content fingerprinting service made available to scan for child sex abuse material. So we subscribe to some of these engines called Google CSAI Match, Safer by Thorn, NCMEC, that's the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They all have databases where they have scanned known instances of child sex abuse material. They have fingerprinted them, and then we can match all of our content against those fingerprints. So if there's a match to any of those, that's the end of it. We make a report. I'll talk about how we report when we get suspected CSAM, child sex abuse material, but that's the end of it. It goes through about 10 of those engines. And by the way, because we actually believe in transparency, we publish twice a year a transparency report in which we describe all of this technology. So I know we're telling you, your listeners, this, and many of them are hearing it for the first time. We have been saying it publicly as clearly and explicit as we can. And someone once asked me at a conference, wow, in your transparency report, you publish all the tools that you use. Aren't you worried that someone's just going to copy what you do? I say, no, that's what we're hoping for. I'm not worried about it. I want every adult and social media company to copy the processes that we use. That's why we don't hide them. We, in fact, are very transparent about them and publish them openly, including the numbers of how many uploads are stopped at what stage and reasons for removal of content, but we'll come to that. Now, if the content passes all of those automated checks, then and only then is it provided to a human moderator for review. We have a team of human moderators that work in shifts, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, in person. They work in a secure facility because, of course, they are charged with reviewing explicit content and reviewing people's personal identifying information, and they review it for moderation. What are they looking for? Number one, we are the only free content sharing platform on the internet that at present requires all individuals featured in content to provide the platform with their identification and consent. Okay, doesn't exist anywhere else. So
just to confirm, if there's 5 people in the video, the person uploading the content is verified, but they also have to provide verification for those 5 individuals in the piece of content they're uploading.
Correct.
Every single time they upload every single piece of content.
Correct. Right now, of course, because we know that individuals might not want to give their identifying information to the uploader. Maybe they just have a business relationship. That's totally fine. They can submit it separately through the portal, but the moderator then matches the ID to the individuals depicted. Okay.
What if, for example, the head or face is not included and it's just a body? How do you manage that?
Yeah, great question, Kim. So we treat content that doesn't show the face to the public the same as if it does show the face. In other words, the moderator has to be satisfied that it's the same person. Now, to the public, they don't see the face. So they might think, well, this person's face was never depicted, so the moderator never saw it. In fact, and I'll be happy to show you this when I show you our tour of trust and safety, moderators have all sorts of ways to confirm it. So for example, they can request that the uploader submit a longer clip, not for publication, just for moderation, that does show the faces. Even though that's not what's going to be shown publicly, clip it out, but the moderator will review that. If a longer piece of content isn't available, they have other things they can do. So for example, they can see the individual depicted, that they have certain distinguishing tattoos, marks, etc., then request a full body and face photo of that uploader so they can match the face to the body and then to the ID that was provided. So faceless content to the public might be faceless. It's not faceless to us on the moderation side.
Interesting.
Yeah. And once again, that's why this dialogue is so important, because there's so much happening behind the scenes, including the fact that all of our moderators are full-time employees of the company. And I know some of your listeners may have heard how other social media companies are outsourcing to call centers around the world. We do absolutely zero outsourcing of moderation. The kind of information we're dealing with is just too private and sensitive to allow for that. And our moderators, it's not sign up today and you're a moderator tomorrow. There's actually a 3-month course before they start any actual work. And at each level, we test them on content because they're doing a lot. They're looking at obviously age ID and consent, but those are the basics. Because for us, our terms of service and our moderation are not bound by what's legal and illegal. I always like to say, complying with the law is like putting your pants on in the morning. You don't get a gold medal for doing that. It is like what's expected of you. But our moderators are looking for so much more than that. Things that we ban. I'll just give you some examples of what is banned and a moderator would be looking for. So obviously, you have to be over 18 to be on the platform, but you can't pretend to be young. So we treat a depiction of an underage person as if it's underage. Whether it's role play, totally consensual, we don't allow it. We will not create a market for that kind of material. Now, sometimes people are more subtle. They don't just get up and say, hi, I'm 17, but they're acting in a way, or they're in a bedroom that has art on the wall that looks like it's a young person, or there's contextual cues that says this is a young person. So we always say a moderator's job is twofold: to look at content, but also to look at context. But we take it even further than depictions of underage. We don't allow any depictions of either non-consensual activity or non-consensual recording. So for example, even people pretending that it's non-consensual, absolutely banned. And by the way, we get uploaders saying, this is our kink, this is what we're into, it's totally consensual. We say, I'm sorry, we're not the platform for you. And at the same time, we also take the exact same approach to depictions of non-consensual recording. So if it pretends to be a spy cam or a voyeur scenario, a hidden recording, we don't allow that. We don't allow even pretend depictions of extortion or intimidation, etc. Similarly, we don't allow for any depictions where a person cannot at all times withdraw consent. So this happens, in the BDSM community, perfectly legitimate, perfectly legal fetish. But if, for example, a person is bound and they can't show non-consent or gagged to the point where they can't show non-consent, we don't allow that. We don't allow depictions of intoxication by drugs or alcohol. Now, this one's going to blow your mind. I never knew about this. I came from outside this world. We don't allow depictions of mind control or hypnosis, even if it's, of course, it's totally pretend. We don't allow it because what it is showing is a depiction of a sexuality that we're just simply not the platform for that. It's totally legal, right? In fact, there are Hollywood movies made all the time where these things are depicted in fiction and they win major awards, but we don't show that. So moderators are looking for many, many things. I could go down a whole list. We don't allow depictions of serious violence that appear likely to cause serious injury or death. Even though total acting, we don't allow that. So the moderators are doing, it's really a very comprehensive job. And that's one of the reasons, by the way, when a verified uploader uploads a piece of content to PornHub, it can take hours to days to sometimes weeks to go through the moderation process. You're not going to have it up instantly. We simply cannot do that to maintain the standard of moderation that we require.
That was going to be one of my questions. How long does this process take? Because I'm assuming someone has to go through a lot of work to get this posted. You're going to do a lot of verification and you have a lot of information specifically about the uploader as well as the people featured in this content. So do you encounter a lot of people attempting to upload not just things that, like you said, you don't allow for good moral reasons, but do you encounter a lot of people trying to upload illegal content, specifically content of minors?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let's just look at the numbers, okay? I believe in facts and evidence. So we voluntarily report any instances of suspected CSAM to NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. I say voluntarily, it's very important that it's voluntary. We do it anyways. We are not a US-based company. We are based in Cyprus, and therefore we have an obligation to report to the Cypriot regulator, which we do. Notwithstanding that, however, for over 4 years, we have been reporting voluntarily to NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And that organization, they're sort of the clearinghouse for these such reports. Facebook reports them, Instagram, Google, etc. Snapchat report to them as well. So remember, because we have full moderation, we're making reports even when nothing went live at all, but we saw it, so we have a duty to report to NCMEC. So last year, in 2023, NCMEC has just released a report on the 2023 year. We made 2,500 reports to NCMEC. That is, now, it might not be actual CSAM. We suspected it was. They're not talking about things that necessarily ever even went live. We kept caught in the moderation process. We made 2,500 reports. Meta, on its platform, so basically between Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, made 20 million reports. Okay? On the other side of that, now it's funny, I was in an interview with a law enforcement officer, and they sort of just gave that a glance and said, is that a typo that you only made 2,500 reports? And I said, you have to remember, nobody is eligible to attempt to upload before they're a verified uploader. So we verified their real identity with biometric scan and government documentation. You have to be a special kind of stupid to try to upload child sex abuse material after having provided your real identity verified by a third party and the platform. Now, does that mean no one does it? There are special kind of stupid and evil live throughout this world. But the verifying process is not just about ensuring age ID consent, that's the primary purpose, but it's also about deterring misbehavior and holding uploaders accountable for what they upload to the internet. We do not allow anything approaching anonymity when it comes to uploading on our platform.
Yeah, I'll just add in, Kim, like, to be very clear, Saul, as you can tell, he really understands, gets into the nitty gritty of it. As an overarching starting point, we have a zero tolerance for child abuse content on our site. It is zero tolerance. And so Saul is pointing out, these are all the steps we take, but it comes from this objective, which is a zero tolerance for child abuse content on our website.
Right. So for the avoidance of doubt, you can confidently say that since your company acquired PornHub and these other platforms, is it correct to say that all these platforms have not only been sanitized, but have had a zero tolerance policy for child abuse content?
Absolute zero tolerance. And in fact, this is not just a policy that is words. We have made enormous investments to ensure our platform is as safe as it can possibly be. Now, Kim, you have to understand, criminals are out there trying to engage in criminal activity every day. One of the limitations and sort of the hesitations in giving a full tour of trust and safety, although we'll give you a pretty full tour, it's not going to be a 100% tour, because you don't show the criminals where all of your alarm systems and your security processes are. So we have tools that I won't even talk about because they are designed to catch people trying to exploit the platform, which, just like people try to rob banks, they try to exploit all kinds of online platforms. We can never rest easy. So when I tell you, assure you, we have a zero tolerance policy, that doesn't mean that the work is done. Every day, new technologies are being developed to fight against wrongdoers online. Unfortunately, that is the nature of trust and safety on the internet.
Yeah, and Kim, you might get into it. I don't want to jump ahead, but this is not just a responsibility that we feel that our companies have alone. We work with law enforcement, we work with governments, we work with not-for-profit organizations, and we'll get into it a lot more, but I just want to say that we also don't think we can do this alone. We understand that we have to work with all of these players, as I said, law enforcement, governments, not-for-profits that are protecting these groups, but also the larger public. We believe it's really important that the public at large understands how they too can play a role in this. So I'll say that, but I know it might be something you might get into. I don't want to get ahead of you, but I just want to say, we are taking this seriously, but we also want to work with others.
Absolutely.
And I just add, because you asked that question sort of about, the last year and since our acquisition. So we acquired in March of 2023. I'm happy to share this with you, and your listeners should really look at this carefully. In that 2023 NCMEC report, so in other words, you always want to know, how did you do? When I was a kid in school, I liked report cards, right? I like knowing what my grades were. I like knowing how I had performed. last year, NCMEC, besides the number of reports that they received from platforms, and those are very proactive reports, they also give the numbers of how many notices they sent to platforms. So a notice is they have detected suspected child sex abuse material and they are notifying the platform of it. So like I said, the meta number was somewhere around 200 between all there. That's notices from NCMEC, not the reports made, the 20 million reports. Notices from NCMEC, we have detected this, that you have not detected. In 2023, the total number of reports of suspected CSAM from NCMEC to all of ALO's platforms was 0.
Wow. I definitely have not heard that before. I have not heard the advocacy groups that have a lot to say about you say that either. That's very
well, and this is not us. Like NCMEC is not a porn industry. They are the National Center for Missing Exploited Children, absolutely, relied on by law enforcement around the United States.
Correct. They're the leading industry when it comes to not only data, but also law enforcement action against this. So I work in social media marketing. I've owned an online marketing agency for about 15 years. I work on various platforms. Not only have I seen all kinds of terrible exploitative content on various platforms that many children use, I've also worked as an undercover junior decoy in counter-trafficking operations and operations where we work with law enforcement pretending to be children on the internet in order to identify and ultimately arrest and convict predators. That being said, these apps that we use, they're not dating apps. They're not dark web apps. They're apps from the App Store that any child can download and use, and these are meetup or social media apps. I won't even go into this whole TED Talk I could give on that, but what I see while I'm pretending to be a child on the internet is just the most horrific exploitation, that like things I've never witnessed as an adult, things no child can unsee. And I have a whole book to write about the lack of moderation from these technology platforms who are knowingly allowing the explicit words and images and videos and solicitations that these adults are sending to children. I'm talking about a baby-faced child's picture and the amount of predators that come pouring in within seconds, literally 10 seconds of me just creating a profile. So I'm very passionate about the topic of internet safety, and I also have a pretty holistic view of it, not only from the known social media world, not only from operating as an undercover in these operations, but also witnessing a lot of these advocacy groups that have a lot of energy directed towards getting rid of PornHub, but I don't see that same energy being applied to platforms like Google, YouTube, Meta, Twitter, all these other platforms that many more users frequent and who aren't leading by example when it comes to implementing these safeguards. So you guys have done a lot of this on a proactively, but also without being required to do so. I would like to, first of all, invite the public to see how you really operate and what the truth is, but then also let's broaden that energy to online spaces in general. And I want to work with you guys to really create a shift in the dynamic of not only the responsibility of big tech platforms, not only the action and legislation and law enforcement, but also from a user perspective, what are we, as we the people, expecting from our government, from the technology platforms, from law enforcement, and general online safety practices? Because we should require much more intensive safeguards while still preserving the rights and freedoms of the individuals.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. And I'll say once again, leading by example is very important for us. And I always tell anyone I'm speaking to, whether they're media or advocacy, government or law enforcement, I say, don't take it from us. Go to the trusted third-party advocacy and internet safety agencies. So a great example of that would be the Internet Watch Foundation in the United Kingdom. Okay? 2 years ago, they signed a partnership with ALO to create best practices and standards for all adult companies to fight against child sex abuse material, right? At the time, that raised a lot of eyebrows, okay? Back then it was called MindGeek, and obviously in the wake of media reports and allegations about PornHub, why is this major internet safety agency in the United Kingdom partnering to create these best standards? Which, by the way, should first tell you that maybe there's more to this discussion than meets the eye, right? Maybe those who are the professionals in those spaces don't have the same view about MindGeek, ALO, PornHub, okay? Now, just 2 weeks ago, the Internet Watch Foundation finalized those standards. And by the way, this is a panel, and once again, I welcome everyone to review it carefully. It's not a PornHub or ALO panel. It has members of law enforcement in the United Kingdom, child protection agencies, and they came together to create these standards where adult companies have to abide by a code of conduct when it comes to protecting against child sex abuse material. They used our processes, as it's very clear, as a model of those practices. They wanted our input because we built this, as you said, proactively. One of the examples of that, and this is really goes to your point about the responsibility to do more than just the legal minimum. And this is something like as we've continued to develop this program, I'm so enormously proud of it. And it goes like this. We have on our platform a banned word list. These are words that cannot be searched for, cannot be used as a username, a comment, a tag, a title. I think we're over 44,000 in more than 35 languages. And remember, the languages of the criminals continue to change. They're always trying to evade detection. So they'll put an @ sign instead of this. They'll have an abbreviation. We actually pay a third-party provider to scrape the dark web looking for these terms so that we can add them to our ban list. We don't have to do that. We're doing it because we want to stay ahead of the predators. Now, what we've done, besides the fact that when you search for these things, you don't find anything, okay? That's number one. Besides for the fact when you search something, you get a warning. This could be illegal. We decided we have to go further than that because we know there are predators out there who are going to come to our platform looking for illegal content. Now, surprise, surprise, they're not going to find it. So it would be totally within our rights to say, that's all we have to do. They came, they looked for something illegal, they searched underage, they found 0 results. Goodbye, and they move on. But the folks at ALO, working in concert with a number of organizations around the world that I'll talk about, they made a decision. I think it's a really principled decision. They said, we can't turn a blind eye to these people coming to our platform. We have to try to do something. So that is where deterrence messaging arose. Deterrence messaging means that when someone searches for child or minor related term, not only do they get 0 results, they also get forwarded to resources that can help them get assistance for these urges, right? Once again, we could close our eyes and say it's not our problem. We're not mental health experts. We're not, sexual wellness experts. But instead, what we've done is we have partnered with organizations in many of the jurisdictions we work, including Canada, the United States, the UK, France, Australia, all over the world. When you search for something like that, you get a link and an encouragement. In fact, in the UK, you even get a chat bot that pops up and says, you're searching for illegal material, help is available, can we get you help, forward you off to this NGO. Because we have absolutely nothing to hide, we gave all the results of this program to a university for academic study, where they found 2 really important things, and this is essential. Number 1, these deterrence messages actually reduce the number of searches looking for illegal content. That's a win in of itself, right? Fewer people were searching over time in the aggregate. But to me, the really important thing is that dozens of people got real world help with these organizations. They got counseling, whether over the phone or in person, but in the real world. And I think to myself, a program like this, of course, it opens up to criticism. Oh, well, people are looking for illegal content, even though they're not finding it. But if we can help one person, which means we can save one child, even one child, all of it's worth it, right? Help one person get assistance so they don't offend in the future. That is a no-brainer. It's not required by any law, but it is who we are as a company. We've been doing this now for years in jurisdiction after jurisdiction.
Yeah, and Kim, I'll add, I think you sort of hinted at it at the beginning, that certainly by even you hosting us on your show, you open yourself up to potential backlash. You open yourself up to individuals not understanding your objective here. Your objective is, let's shed some light on this. Let's collaborate. Let's find ways to reduce harm online. And if it's by, taking on a bit of that risk yourself, to open this up, to allow your listeners to understand what, we are trying to do, that does bring on some risk. So when at the beginning, your question about social media platforms, we want, and Saul mentioned it, we want to make this data we have, the tools we have available to other companies, because we are, if you will, we are the first that are doing some of these efforts, because we absolutely have to. The content that we are sharing is for adults only, and we need to ensure that young people are not in the content. Zero tolerance for young people being in the content, but also zero tolerance for young people consuming the content. This is content that is restricted to adults. And so we want to share that finding, that data, the tools that we have, but that brings on some risk to companies, to individuals, organization, not-for-profits, as Saul mentioned, the IWF. It brings on risk to those organizations now, because they are willing to sit down with us, understand what we're trying to do, and work with us. So we appreciate that we are making efforts. We're absolutely reaching out to social media companies. We're absolutely reaching out to governments, law enforcement, organizations like yours, and we are working with them. Sometimes it's difficult to share that, because it brings on and it compromises that really important work that we're doing. And we, it being public, or us getting, kudos or credit or recognition for some of the work we're doing, if it puts at risk the work that we're doing, then it's not worth it for us. It's not worth it for those organizations. So to try to kind of bring it back to what are other social media platforms doing? We're trying to work with everyone. We're trying to make sure that same objective, which is keeping kids safe online, keeping the internet safe. So it's more like a call out to your listeners, or anyone who's listening, corporations, individuals. If there are things that we could be doing differently, if there are tools that they're aware of, they may not want to contact us, but there are not-for-profits that they can work through that are our partners. And all of that is publicly available on our website. I mean, I don't want anyone to, be sending you thousands of emails, but even you, Kim, like, if people see that through you, they have a funnel towards us, then I invite people to think about what are things that we should be doing. If we're not talking to individuals like yourself or to experts, we also will become stagnant. We need to understand what's happening in the larger internet. Saul mentioned that, we also work with organizations that are scouring the dark web, because we can't just pretend that we exist in this very safe space. This is the internet, and all of us are responsible for keeping it safe.
That's absolutely right. I was going to offer my personal email, in addition to anyone who wants to reach out to you, and I obviously invite them to do so, specifically if they're an advocacy group, or if they have complaints or concerns or feedback, or even suggestions for improvement. I would absolutely recommend them to directly reach out. And I know for a fact that you're easy to get a hold of and you're very responsive. I'd also like to invite people, if for some reason they don't feel comfortable or would just prefer to reach out to me, the email is contact@unitingamericainc.org. If there's an accusation, if there's content that you believe is not appropriate, or that you didn't consent of, or that you've had a hard time taking it down, reach out to us. This is a solicitation to let's work together. Let's not just talk about the problem. Let's actually work together with the right people for solutions. I challenge every single person who has a complaint or concern to contact either Ethical Capital Partners or myself, and let's work together to solve it.
And just in terms of content removal, the very best thing to do, this is an essential plank of our trust and safety program. And on every single page of every single one of our platforms is something called the content removal request form. If an individual fills that out and indicates that they have firsthand knowledge that what is depicted is either underage or non-consensual, and Kim, you talked about withdrawing consent, I want to highlight that. We require ongoing consent in order to have people's content featured on our platform. So if an individual withdraws consent, go ahead, fill out the content removal request form. You'll see this and try it out. It will come down with no investigation. The investigation comes after it's been taken down. I call that the take down first, ask questions later approach. So anyone can fill out a content. Now, if you fill out that content removal request form and say, I don't like porn, take this down, well, fair enough. But if you say, that's me in the content, then you'll be contacted to prove it, right? Provide some details, but it'll be down in the interim. It will be removed. The content removal request form is on every single one of our platforms, on every single page, and it is automatic when it comes to takedown. So, it's an important process. It's required because consent is at the heart of what we do.
I love that. That's very interesting. One of the questions I had was regarding ongoing consent, or if someone no longer consents. So we talked about there's definitely a gray zone. To me, there's a very clear, undeniable distinction between child exploitation and adult sexual content. Like, those are not the same conversation. But within the adult sexual content, there's a lot of spectrums here where, for example, I've seen advocates that, they made consensual adult entertainment content, whether or not it was intended to be public, it was consensual. And then maybe they had a breakup and someone, the whole revenge porn thing. So that's not the same thing as being a victim of trafficking or sex trafficking, like not the same thing at all. While I have a massive amount of empathy and I take that very seriously, no one should be exploited or, their vulnerability shouldn't be used against them. However, there's also a conversation that should be had about what are we doing to really inform children? This goes beyond your responsibilities, by the way. This is the public and parents and specifically advocate groups who really care about this. Are we also making an effort to educate people that once you put something on the internet, it is there to stay and to be shared forever? So just like YouTube isn't responsible for everything that everyone uploads to their platform, and like we talked about, YouTube doesn't do a lot to verify that you either have the rights and or it's appropriate content. However, if you sexualize yourself on the internet, that content can live forever. So there's a conversation that needs to be had around educating not only young people, but women and people in general about if you send nudes to your boyfriend, know that it may get leaked. And it's not necessarily the responsibility of the platform that it lives on. However, what you're saying is that even if it was consensual content, nothing illegal or necessarily immoral, but that person no longer or as of now does not consent, they can literally submit a form and have it taken down for review. And as long as it's them, you will actually honor that.
Correct. That's all content that comes through the verified uploader program. Obviously, we're talking about content individuals have generated, whether you're the one who posted it or not, whether you've just changed your mind. We actually even go a little further than that. When somebody sends a content removal request form, we actually use our own internal fingerprinting software to look for other instances of that same content on our platform. Maybe it's part of a larger clip compilation or a shorter form. We have technology that can scan for that. We do a number of things. We'll also send requests to Google to delist even the link with the name, because obviously Google is a separate company. We don't control what they post online, but we do send removal requests. And we'll also, for individuals who say, well, my content is on other platforms as well, we will then forward them some tools that are available to have to look for their content and have their content removed elsewhere. So ongoing consent is essential because, Kim, and I think you put it really well, this distinction between legal adult content and sex trafficking. To me, I make it very clear. The distinction between, and we'll just say porn, we're not scared of that word, the distinction between porn and sex trafficking is the distinction between work and slavery. Okay? Work is legitimate and deserving of protection, and it is a decision someone makes. Slavery is not. And sex trafficking is slavery, and like child sex abuse material, we have a zero tolerance policy for sex trafficking on our platform.
Absolutely. There's also not only the commercialization of it, but like you said, the forced nature of it, the exploitative nature of it. I know many people that are close to me who choose to have, be a sex worker or be in that industry. And that's their choice. While I may not have chosen that, I may not want that. That's their choice. And I agree with you about protecting not only their rights, but ensuring that it is a safe place. Because here's another aspect of this conversation that I don't see people discussing the logic of. If, for example, some of these advocacy groups were to get their way and eliminate PornHub, where it's no longer a thing and it's seized by the DOJ, then where does that demand go? Logically speaking, you're not going to get rid of the demand for adult sexual entertainment. Again, we are not talking about child exploitation or sex trafficking. We are talking about consensual adult entertainment for those who enjoy that. That demand is not going away. So if you get rid of some of the biggest players like yourselves, where does that demand go? It goes to the black market. It goes to the dark alleyways where it's not regulated. It's much more unsafe. There are a lot more things that they can get away with on those platforms. So again, the whole intent of this dialogue is, first of all, educate the public, shed light on truth and what's real and what's not, and as far as solutions and problems, but also let's have a logical discussion. I'm not here to advocate for porn. There's also a way to do it correctly where the people who want to enjoy those freedoms can have the freedom to express themselves safely. So I'm very focused on protecting children. Our organization does a lot with social justice to advocate for the wrongfully accused, or people of all ages that need assistance. So I'm passionate when it extends to all ages and demographics and genders and all of that. It comes down to, let's separate this conversation from what's appropriate for children and what's appropriate for adults. If you're an adult, you can go to a strip club. I don't need to know what the stripper looks like or how they look or what they're wearing, but you cannot bring kids in. That's the line in the sand. So from my perspective, as in the public eye, let's all agree on this line in the sand. Let's just have a zero tolerance policy for child exploitation. And let's let adults do safely what they have the rights and freedom to do, at least under our laws.
And Kim, for us, it's not a line in the sand. It's a line in cement. It is an infrastructure that it is no way to get around. So, I know the expression is line in the sand. For us, it's a line in a skyscraper, the difference between adult and children.
Yeah, and I think I'll say this, Kim, and it's why dialogue like this is so important, why I'm so honored that you want to speak to us and your audience wants to hear from us. Because I say this, you say that, well, I don't really have an opinion on adults one way or another, and I can even go further. Let's say you told me, Kim, I am against pornography. I would say, great, we can disagree on that. Right. Let's put that to the side and let's go on what we agree on, because we agree on far more than we disagree on. We agree that there should be zero tolerance for child sex abuse material. We agree that child predators should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, that they should be deterred, detected, investigated, and prosecuted. We believe that consent is essential. We believe that non-consensual content should be eradicated. So it's like, I don't even need someone to say I'm quote unquote agnostic about porn. You can be anti-porn, that's fine. We have so much to talk about and work on, far more than just, consensual adult content.
Yes, that's absolutely right. So speaking of, another big concern that is very important is the age verification. Moving on from your platforms, you can assure the public that they are free of child abuse content. Now, what do we do about children being able to log onto the internet and access porn freely? So I've seen different conversations about this, and it's a complex matter because unfortunately there's not a one-size-fits-all problem. Therefore, there's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all solution. And I agree that it's not just up to you. This is a larger conversation that applies to many more platforms than just yours. But can you talk about some of the safeguards that you are actually behind, as well as some of the legislative changes, such as those in Texas, where they required, I believe, PornHub to verify the age of consent, and you decided to pull out of those states. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. So why don't we start? I always like to start with values, right? Just like people, companies are animated by values. The values of their founders, their executives, and their employees. Our value when it comes to this topic is simple. We do not want any young people whatsoever on our platforms. Okay? The performers who are creating this content do not want young people viewing it. We don't want young people viewing it. We're of the view that it's inappropriate for young people. It is not in their best interests, and they should not be viewing this content, period. We have no interest whatsoever in young people on our platforms. Now, the question then is, what do you do about that? If that's your value, and that is our value, what do we do about it? So I'll talk about what we have been able to do alone, and then I'll talk about what we need to do in concert with the other major actors who have influence and impact online. So as of today, and this has been in place for many months now, something else that I'm quite personally proud of, when you go to any one of our platforms from anywhere in the world, including in the United States, before seeing any explicit content, you see, are you 18, under 18, over 18? Obviously, if you say you're over, you can go forward. If you say you're under, you cannot. Now, that's of limited utility without the ability to verify, because how do you know someone is over or under 18? But what's much more important is that on that very same dialog box that pops up, by the way, without seeing any porn, nothing explicit whatsoever, we have a link right then and there to parental controls, okay? And people can test this out themselves. If you've been to our platform before and clicked accept, then you'll be past this. Do it in incognito mode or clear your cache. I'm like the IT nerd around, I gotta give you some advice. But it's for when you first go to the platform. We want a center for parents and guardians to make it easy for them to block our platform. I want to reiterate that. I'm telling you from the owners of PornHub, we want to make it easy for parents to block the platform. And if you go to our parental controls link, which is right there, before seeing any explicit content, we give all the options to block at the router level, to block at the device level, to block at the internet service provider level. So that's something that we can do on our own. Let's then talk about broader solutions, because we need to do more. And we're of the view that we have a responsibility to do more, and the internet in general has a responsibility to do more. So take a look at the law in places like Texas. So the Texas law, which in our view, by the way, is unconstitutional, and we're challenging it up to the Supreme Court of the United States, requires everyone, adults included, to provide their identity and their identifying information, including government-issued ID, before accessing legal content. And to us, we will not gather the personal identifying information of our visitors. We believe strongly in the right of free expression, the right of privacy online. So for that reason, we are of the view that it's ineffective. Now, it's also ineffective at protecting children. Let's just play this out. A child comes to PornHub and they get the Texas age verification, have to put an ID. What do? They go elsewhere. They just go to a site that does not comply. And there are hundreds of thousands of such sites hosted all over the world, far beyond the reach of the Texas government and the state government in any jurisdiction, and they go to that platform. So I say that this kind of site-based age verification, where you get a prove your age to the site, is like a locked door in the middle of the desert. Sure, the door is locked, but you just walk around it. It'll do nothing whatsoever to keep either young people or adults safe. In fact, it'll actually only make adults less safe, because the same platforms that don't require that kind of verification are the same platforms without our trust and safety, without uploader verification, without moderation, without our standards. So then what is the solution? And I'm a very solutions-oriented guy, and I'm very fortunate to have been part of the ownership group of a very solutions-oriented company. And that is looking at this problem. Like, the problem here is about, it's actually twofold, Kim, and I'm so glad that you brought up the idea of predators preying on children on different kind of apps. Because I always say, if you think this is a porn problem, you don't understand age verification. Because age verification is equally, just as much as it's about keeping children out of adult spaces, even more importantly, I think it's about keeping adults out of children's spaces. Because the kind of exploitation that happens when youth-oriented apps, young people gather in spaces online that are then invaded by predators, that is equally, if not, far more harmful than young people being exposed to explicit content, which is also harmful, something that we want nothing of. So how do we do it? The answer is very simple. And in fact, Kim, Sarah, most of your listeners, the answer is in your pocket. It is your device. Instead of targeting sites, which by the way makes no sense at all. The law in Texas, for example, targets only sites that have a certain proportion of their content being adult or explicit content. Well, I always say this. What's the largest repository of adult content online? Call it the largest porn site in the world. It's not us. It's not any of our competitors. It's Google Images. Mm-hmm. Google Images has more porn than all of us combined. Or as the Australian e-safety commissioner found, the majority of young people first encounter porn on quote unquote safe for work sites like Twitter and Reddit before they ever get to a porn site. So if you have a law that only quote unquote targets adult sites, you're missing the mark. You need to start at the source. The source is the device. I'm going to say something, Kim, it's going to be surprising. And it surprises, I had a room, I presented at a conference of 400 investigators and prosecutors who focus on internet child exploitation. And there was a gasp when I said this. We want, as a company, for all devices by default to block adult content. That is, when you have a new device or a new user registering access to a device, the default is no adult. And if you want to be able to access adult on the device, where we already have all our trusted information, our banking information, our credit card information, our health information, our government biometric identity, everything. We unlock these things with our faces, okay? Your ID can reside securely there to verify your age, and then the device becomes the key. We will be the lock. And the good thing about this is, instead of convincing, legislating, cajoling hundreds of thousands, if not millions of websites, we only have 3 operating system manufacturers we need to be concerned with: Google, Apple and Microsoft. And they already have the technology. They just have it as opt-in. You need to activate these controls. We want it to be opt-out, that these controls are activated by default. And if we could accomplish that and have a world where both children, and by the way, adults who don't want to see porn should also be part of this, that they can't see this material even by accident, I think the internet gets a lot safer for everyone. So we are working day in, day out to make this happen, but we need those players, including legislators, to make it a reality.
Right.
Yeah. And to be clear, Kim, one of the things that, we've seen a lot of news coverage in the US saying that age verification laws that have been introduced in the US have been successful because we ran PornHub out of that state. Blocking in those states was a choice that we made. We were not banned or blocked. We proactively made a decision as a company, as Saul was saying. We will not hold or ask our users to share with us their very sensitive private information and link it to legal behavior online. If you go onto your government's website, if you go onto most government websites, there will be a page on those websites that say, be very careful about who and how often you share your driver's license, any form of ID that has your private sensitive information, a driver's license. It says on government websites, do not share this information. And now these laws are asking people to not only share it with one site, with millions of sites. They're asking the government is asking those users in those states to share their private sensitive information with millions of sites, which Saul said, there are, today we see breaches in banks, government websites, etc. And their companies, banks and governments follow very, very strict rules. Now imagine millions of adult sites that are based in countries far, far away. The government is asking people to trust those sites.
Right.
It isn't online hygiene. And the government actually says it is not online hygiene. And yet they're asking people to do it.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. So I have a question about the difference between the existing, because PornHub and sites like that have membership where people obviously sign up, enter their payment information. I'm assuming age verification as well. So that requires proof of age and credit card. And since both systems store personal data, how does PornHub address concerns about data security and privacy and sort of differentiate that?
Yeah, great question. So as a European company, we're bound by some of the strictest data protection rules on the planet, and we apply all those same protections no matter where our users are located. So they all get the benefit of that. And once again, I know people don't come to pornhub.com to read the articles, but you should read the privacy policy. It's actually pretty interesting. And it, by the way, includes a right to have your private data deleted. But we do not gather any personal or private identifying information of our visitors. We don't do that. When it comes to someone who signs up and buys a premium product from one of our subscription services, we take only the minimum data that's required in order to facilitate the transaction. That's in fact what the law requires us to do. We're not allowed to take more information than is required. What this would do is expose 130 million people a day to reporting their personal identifying information to sites like ours. But as Sarah said, there are millions of adult sites, and there's new ones popping up every day. And who, by the way, this is something that I really emphasize, not all these sites have either our commitment to trust and safety and privacy or the infrastructure and the data security that we have. It's one thing to do that when you're a company of 1,400. We have 500 engineers building tech products every day, right? But the idea that this information is just going to be given out freely online, and I'll tell you, it's interesting. When we first litigated this in Texas, the judge, Justice David Ezra, who heard it, by the way, a Ronald Reagan appointee, so not some namby-pamby liberal judge, okay? Appointed by Ronald Reagan to the bench and still going strong. He said something really interesting. He said, of course, this is going to deter free expression online. How will it violate the First Amendment? Think about it this way. Somebody in Texas is going to be accessing perfectly legal content and sharing their sexual preferences with the government of Texas. That's unacceptable in a free society. We don't do that. Particularly where, in Texas, the government has tried to, not 20 years ago, tried to outlaw consensual homosexuality. You can have whatever moral or religious belief you want, but it's constitutionally protected. Adults have the right to make those free choices. And we do not share that information with the government. We just don't. So the device-based solution is one that protects the private data because that information never comes to us as an adult provider.
And it's much more of a holistic safeguard because, to your point, there are many different platforms that are not either have content that's not appropriate for children and or that children shouldn't access, etc. So what's in the way of the device-based verification? I'm assuming you guys are behind that and working towards that. What are the obstacles to attain that?
Okay, so I'd say there's two things. The first one is this site-based approach that seems to be going from state to state. What is the major obstacle is, as I've said, just by the fact that it doesn't include Google or Reddit or Twitter, it tells you that it's not about keeping young people away from adult content. It's about trying to destroy the adult industry for ideological reasons. That's straight up. And in fact, the sponsors of that bill readily acknowledge who has been behind it and pushing it from state to state. So, you know, when you're not focused on the actual problem, you're never going to get to the right solution. I say it's like this old parable. A guy comes out of a bar and he sees this drunk stumbling around a light post. And he says, "What are you doing?" And the drunk says, "Well, I lost my keys and I'm looking for my keys." He says, "Okay, well, where did you lose them?" And he points all the way down the darkened street. He said, "I lost them down there." And he said, "Well, if you lost them down there, why are you looking under the light post?" And he says, "Well, the light's better over here." So where your target is by definition not going to address your stated means, then your stated means are baloney. It's not really what you're interested in doing. So the first thing I want to do, I say, we need to actually have a conversation about protecting young people. If that's your goal, then this approach is absurd, number one. Number two, we need the legislative and regulatory will to require Apple, Google, and Microsoft to take this action. And if they don't take it voluntarily, they should be legislated to do it. And it's funny, you know, sometimes people hear that, they say, well, you're just passing the buck. I say, no, no, no. There should be two parts of this law. Number one, devices by default must block adult content. And second of all, adult sites must identify themselves using meta tags, such as the restricted to adult flag, to identify themselves to devices that they are adult sites. And guess what? We've been doing that for years. And the vast majority of sites do it. And if adult sites don't do it, they should be penalized. It should be required. We do it voluntarily because we want filters, content filters, to know that we're an adult site. You know, obviously, if PornHub.com in the URL wasn't a giveaway, that's fine. We will fly the digital restricted to adult flag. We already do, and we have for years. So this is not a matter of passing the buck. It's a matter of understanding that we have an area really of shared jurisdiction, and we need to collaborate to get that done. So that's what's in the way. Poor intentions on the legislative front, and then a lack of will to require this from the device and operating system manufacturers.
That makes sense. I share your sentiment about really understanding the problem and working towards holistic solutions, not just Band-Aids. I see a lot of Band-Aid solutions in general, and it drives me crazy in a lot of different areas. But specifically when it comes to this discussion, there's a lot of people with either religious or political bias, and or they just want the appearance of taking action, but they're not actually trying to solve the problem. For me, what it comes down to in the topic of protecting children, which is my fight, unfortunately, there's no money in protecting children. And unfortunately, when I act as an undercover junior decoy on these random, meetup apps, there are seriously hundreds of predators. When I'm pretending to be 12 or 13 years old on the internet, I chat with hundreds of predators within the span of 2 or 3 days, again, saying all kinds of violently aggressive and terribly inappropriate words that you can like not even just code words and emojis, but very explicit words and images and content. These technology platforms have the technology to identify those words and that content. The same technology that identifies that word in your post that they say violate their community guidelines, that same technology should be used to protect children. Now, to me, it's intentional that it's not being used to protect children. And on the one hand, I understand that those technology platforms are profiting from their user base, so they're not incentivized to ban these people who are predators using their platform. I understand they're not necessarily responsible for people being creepy on their platform, but in my opinion, they are responsible to not only sanitize their platform, but to limit the reach of those predators specifically to children. So when it comes to this discussion, unfortunately, there's not a lot of profit-driven incentives for big tech companies in general to protect children. And I'm overgeneralizing things.
I'll disagree with you a little bit. I think there is profit in it. I think that if let's say you're a device manufacturer and you can market your device as being the device that's safe for children, you should do it.
I think that's where I'm going with this. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I would like to change the dynamic. Like, ideally, they'd all just do the right thing because morals and values. But also, if we could create a culture where we, the people, are not only aware of the responsibility that they hold, but the actionable, solvable problems that they should be implementing, people would shift. The consumers would shift towards the responsible platforms. Whether you're an adult enjoying adult content, I would assume they would favor the platforms that are doing the right thing to protect children. I would assume that those companies leading by example are going to actually increase their user base and membership and therefore profits. So that's not there yet in our culture as a whole. But I think we're moving towards that direction. And that's one of the reasons that I'm being very public facing about this advocacy and this discussion, because many people are not aware that that's a possible solution. They're not aware that platforms like you and people like you are going above and beyond to try to be proactive, and that honestly, you're not getting the right type of support from legislation, law enforcement, and policies.
Yeah, I'll say, Kim, I'll add on, not only would this keep kids safe from porn, it would keep them safe from tobacco, gaming, gambling, because all of those adult consumption, all that adult consumption would fall under this. So it is, Saul was saying the technology already exists. And the other thing that's important in this, if you will, this trifecta is government needs to come to the table, industry needs to come to the table, but parents still get to have a role in this. They would be the ones when they're purchasing their young person's first phone, their first computer, etc. They would have this opportunity right from the beginning. Saul, pointed out his phone that you have your biometrics. When I bought my phone, this latest phone, I was asked a bunch of questions right from the beginning that I got to decide what sort of information I was going to share with my phone. Parents would get to decide right away from the beginning, this is a phone for a child, period.
Absolutely.
And so the parents still get to play a very important role in this if you will, this trifecta as well of like, so we're not saying that government is going to be solely responsible. We're not saying industry is going to be solely responsible. We're saying all three of these groups,
absolutely,
guardians, parents, etc., as government and industry have to come to the table and work together, because the internet is evolving. And Saul said it, we can't just remain stagnant. We have to evolve with the internet. We have to be, as much as possible ahead of this. And this is one of those solutions that we think it has such an opportunity.
Yes, absolutely. I want to highlight what you said about the parental responsibility, because when I do speaking events and everything, yes, there are multiple aspects of this problem that we need to unpack and understand in order to implement effective solutions. One of them is that parents should not expect the government to implement the regulations that they need to parent their children, right? So I liken giving a child an electronic device that has access to the internet. It's like giving your child a loaded weapon. You wouldn't just hand that over without safeguards. So my plea to every parent and caretaker is, please don't give your child unlimited, unsupervised access to the internet. I understand there's a lot of positives about technology. However, please don't assume that the internet is a safe place for children, because in this conversation, we're very focused on pornographic content. However, the things I saw while pretending to be a child on the internet went far beyond pornography. Yes, I was sent adult pornography. And in fact, I was sent child pornography. An adult predator thought he was sending that to a 13-year-old child. However, the amount of words and graphic solicitations, the amount of what would you do for $500 and other forms of exploitative input that children are receiving on the internet. Again, this is a multifaceted discussion. So if we can implement safeguards right now, we can build a fence at the top of the cliff. We can do the bare minimum requirements, but there's so much above and beyond that we could do if we were to come together collectively and focus on the real problems and therefore effective solutions.
Couldn't agree more.
Couldn't have said it better.
I'm passionate, as you can tell. So talk to me about your law enforcement collaboration. So how does Pornhub, you mentioned NCMEC, and I know you're in a lot of different countries around the world, so I'm sure it varies, but specifically in the United States, how does Pornhub collaborate with law enforcement to combat child sex trafficking, exploitation, and are there any specific partnerships or initiatives that you could discuss?
Yeah, sure, I'd be happy to. And I'll say that the sort of the general caveat about this is there are operational details where we have worked or cooperated with law enforcement in certain venues where we're asked and sometimes even required not to disclose that. So I can't get into certain specifics, but I can definitely talk about a lot of the programs we run, as well as many public-facing initiatives. So it is essential to us that law enforcement have easy, efficient, and effective access to our data so that they can do their job. Now, sometimes, especially for companies that are headquartered out of the United States, which, by the way, most of your social media companies are, Google included, Facebook, they might be in California, but they're not in California. They have head offices elsewhere for a number of reasons. We wanted to make it, and we're headquartered in Cyprus. We didn't want law enforcement to have to go find a Cypriot address for service of a subpoena or a warrant or a judicial authorization. So we built what's called a law enforcement portal to put at law enforcement's fingertips access to provide us with the authorizing documents, as well as so they can get all their responses in one sort of coherent way. Because it's essential to us that when law enforcement has a judicial authorization, whether it's a search warrant or a subpoena to try to get data about a potential offender, that they can do that really quickly, because in child protection investigations, minutes and hours matter. So we staff those requests 24/7. We have an incredibly fast turnaround. It's funny, I'll go back to my old lawyer days here. I remember seeing subpoenas going to your major telecom providers, AT&T, but also social networks like Facebook, where it would take them a week or more to respond. You ask any frontline cop, that's pretty standard. We get to these requests generally in matters of hours. And where they are urgent, we go faster, we work weekends, because this data, if it's essential to an investigation, we're talking about saving a kid here, and nothing comes in front of that. So we have a law enforcement portal. We also, and this goes back to the Verified Uploader program, we educate law enforcement. Like I said, I spoke at a conference in the fall. We speak at conferences all over the world, both from ALO and Ethical Capital Partners, so that law enforcement know what to ask for. We will often get a subpoena that will say, we're investigating this individual. Can you provide their IP address and their username? And what we do, by the way, we don't just give them their IP address or username. We say, we have a Verified Uploader program. Please request their real face, their picture, their ID, their address. We can go so much further than IP address because we require verification of all uploaders. And that, by the way, is not just for potential child predators, but also for individuals who are posting alleged non-consensual intimate imagery, right? Quote unquote revenge porn. So we also work to educate law enforcement. Now, we've gone even further than that, and we've brought in those partnerships. So we've recently announced a working relationship and partnership with Crime Stoppers International. Many of your listeners are familiar with Crime Stoppers. Crime Stoppers traditionally has been about providing civilians anonymous routes to contact and provide information to law enforcement. But they really do a lot more than that. So we've asked them to do two things. So the first one actually comes to your question, your earlier question about knowing that we are doing what we say. So of course, you're invited in. We'd love to show this to you. We have voluntarily asked Crime Stoppers to audit us, to audit our trust and safety and report back to the public and back to law enforcement. But we've also asked Crime Stoppers to be a conduit between us and law enforcement. They're a very trusted name. Law enforcement works with them regularly. That's a well-known, well-supported relationship. But we want to make sure that instead of just going on a sort of one agency, another agency basis, that there's a larger group above that can help us, number one, understand what law enforcement needs, provide them what they need, and do so in a timely manner. So, that's just one example of what we're doing. Like I said, I speak at conferences, we speak at conferences, we meet law enforcement. And I'll say something that's really important. I think it's well worth mentioning. There are a number of advocacy organizations. As you said, some of them are very well-meaning. Some of them are totally anti-porn, anti-adult, who single out our platform and our industry for criticism. You rarely hear that from law enforcement. Ask yourself that, okay? The law enforcement officials who are dealing with child sex abuse material every day, they know where it's actually being trafficked. They know who the actual offenders are. In fact, I've spoken to many senior law enforcement who say very clearly, we know that you are not the problem. We know that you are responsible actors in this space. An example, we work very closely with ICMEC, the International Center for Missing Exploited Children. We've presented at conferences. We invite the public to really learn from those experts who are on the front line. Does that mean that we're perfect? Of course not. Does that mean we can learn? We always have to learn, evolve, and get better. But law enforcement knows that we're allies in this fight, right? They know that we are up at all hours, our staff willing to answer their requests and help them in any way we can. And I think the proof is in the pudding in that regard.
Right. So not only compliant, but proactive. So, for example, can you walk us through, if you were to identify, let's say, child abuse material or something illegal on your platform, what's the process of turning that over to law enforcement and the follow-up?
Great question. In fact, and I'll show you this visually behind the scenes. So let's say, for example, remember I said when you apply to upload content, it goes through these 10 automated engines.
Process of verifying the uploader, right?
Yeah, we're past the process of verifying the uploader. This is about content that gets uploaded. So usually when there's a match on one of those databases, there's a match on multiple databases. The moment there's a match, that content gets segregated. I want to say what that means. It means that no frontline moderator can review it. We have potential child sex abuse material. It's unacceptable that even an employee can review it. We call it quarantine. It gets quarantined, okay? It can now only be reviewed by legal and by director of trust and safety, but before that happens, automatically a report is generated to NECMEC. That report contains the file, but it also contains all of the details of the verified uploader, so that a proper request can be made by law enforcement who want a search warrant or want to be able to carry this investigation on. Now, I don't want to speak for NECMEC in terms of their processes, but I'll tell you what I understand. When they receive that report, they have to decide if it's actionable or not. In other words, first of all, do they believe that it's child sex abuse material? Because remember, our standards of CSAM are higher than NECMEC's. So for us, somebody role-playing as a child is child sex abuse material and we report it, they may not determine that that is actionable. And that's fine, that's their decision. We've handed it off to law enforcement. But then what they'll do is they'll look for some local geographic identifiers, either in the verified uploader, the IP address, and they will then pass it off to local law enforcement for investigation and enforcement. But that's something that happens automatically for any potential piece of child sex abuse material that is detected either in an automated way or by a human moderator.
Very interesting. So in general, do you have a pretty good, I know this probably varies in location, but do you have a pretty good follow-up process from law enforcement? Do you find that they're very efficient in follow through?
Yeah, so of course, law enforcement takes this very seriously. One of the problems that law enforcement faces these days, and I think, Kim, you spoke to it when you talked about sort of, the deluge of inappropriate advances that you get as a young person. That is, this problem is of a massive scale. And frankly, law enforcement are just overwhelmed by these kind of reports. So something else that we're doing, and this was announced as part of our collaboration with Crime Stoppers International, is that we are trying to make available the tech tools that we use to scan this content to law enforcement so they can scan devices they seize when they execute search warrants, so they can wade through the hundreds of thousands of pieces of content that are generated in these investigations. Once again, compliance with the law, compliance with regulation is the starting point. We want to be part of the solution. So we have in-house tools. One of them is called Safeguard. The other is called Searchlight. We have now offered to make them available for free to law enforcement. There's no profit motive in that. We're not looking to make a penny off law enforcement. We want these tools in the hands of those who can use them best. And we use them obviously to scan content at the upload stage, but we also want law enforcement to use them in investigations because they need help. It's that simple. They don't have enough man hours. They don't have the resources to do it. And if private companies like ours who've developed these tools to keep our platform safe can share those for free, well, to me, that is an absolute no-brainer. And in fact, it is one of the reasons that we made this investment, because that must happen on a large scale.
Yeah, I love that. That's very, very impressive. I want people to understand the impact that this will have on future generations, not only the work we're doing, not only this discussion today, but the implications of sanitizing the internet, of protecting children on a greater scale beyond pornography, but just from inappropriate content on the internet, it's something that needs to change. And I believe that working with the right people, like your group, like law enforcement, like legislators and policy, we can see this change happen within our lifetime. That's my goal, and I'm honored to be working with you guys in that commitment. So let's shift now to talk about the elephant in the room. Let's talk about the lawsuits. So there's accusations that there are current lawsuits. I understand that as an attorney, there may be limited things you can say about these active lawsuits, but what I want to understand is, since you've acquired these platforms in March of 2023, have there been new lawsuits regarding child exploitation or specifically sex trafficking from your platforms?
Yeah, so to my knowledge, once again, and obviously I'll talk about some of the boundaries of what I can talk about when it comes to dated allegations. There aren't allegations that relate to any content that has been posted on the platform since we made our acquisition. So that's generally number one, whether it's child sex abuse material or sex trafficking of any kind. So that's number one.
So no new lawsuits since you've acquired.
Correct. That relate to nothing that relates to anything that happened post our acquisition, okay? To the best of my knowledge. Let's talk about lawsuits in general, all right? When an individual makes a claim against another individual or a company, those are allegations. Individuals can make claims. They can be supported by proof, not supported by proof, but they will be determined by the justice system, all right? I have very deep respect for the American justice system. I'm a practicing lawyer in Canada myself. I really believe in the justice system. And for that reason, I can't comment on the specifics of those allegations because they're before the court. What I can tell you is what I've told you here, which is we have a zero tolerance policy for child sex abuse material or for sex trafficking or for any other illegal content. And we employ, I think, industry-leading measures to fight it, and we have for some time. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't want to address this, because I do. So first of all, I'll say this. When it comes to lawsuits, my commitment as part of the ownership group is to just outcomes. And just outcomes can mean either a trial process where findings are made, a settlement, a withdrawal of claims, but I want just outcomes. I want just outcomes for anyone who has been harmed. I want just outcomes for the truth to prevail. Now, you mentioned two specific kind of allegations, and I want to highlight them. Number one, the child sex abuse material, intentional, quote unquote, monetizing of child sex abuse material, and facilitating child or other sex trafficking. Some of your listeners may be aware of this, some may not. I'm happy to educate them. Earlier this year, the US Justice Department concluded a 30-month investigation of MindGeek and then ALO, so all of our platforms. This was in the wake of the New York Times opinion column that sparked much of the public awareness of this. There was a 30-month investigation, and here are the facts. Don't take my word for it. Please go read the original court documents, as well as the press release that has been authorized by the U.S. Attorney's Office. Okay? The U.S. Attorney's Office concluded as follows, that after a 30-month investigation where they got full and open cooperation from our company, okay? They say they got cooperation and access from our company. They concluded, this is the U.S. Department of Justice, they concluded that they did not find evidence of the violation of the federal offenses of child sex abuse material, child sex exploitation, or sex trafficking on our platforms, and therefore we're not going to pursue any charges in that regard. So to me, my personal view is that that puts to rest those allegations. We were investigated over 30 months by the US government. We provided them with open and comprehensive access to whatever they requested, and they concluded that there was not evidence of child sex abuse material, of child trafficking, sex trafficking, to warrant any federal charges, and they declined to pursue such charges. In the course of their investigation, however, what was discovered was that one of our content partners had provided us with falsified consent forms, claiming they had consent from individuals. This is professional studio content. It turned out, we later learned that those women were coerced and defrauded into signing those agreements, right? When we learned that, and by the way, those sex traffickers, because that's really what they were prosecuted to the full extent of the law. we have entered into a voluntary agreement to make compensation to those survivors. Because, by the way, it's interesting, the actual criminals themselves, they have no money. And they're never going to be able to make these victims of this terrible conduct whole. So as part of this agreement, we have agreed to make voluntary payments to compensate these victims. And this is called a deferred prosecution agreement. The government has agreed, and we, by the way, have pled not guilty. The government is going to dismiss those charges against us following the completion of a number of things. One is those voluntary payments. The second is a third-party monitor who is going to verify all of our trust and safety processes. And the government, and this is all available online, you can read the deferred prosecution agreement yourself, and I highly recommend it. I think an educated audience is the best audience. The government said, we are entering into this agreement for a number of reasons, and they include the following. First of all, your trust and safety program. Second of all, your commitment to resourcing that trust and safety program, your total cooperation, as well, your new ownership's commitment to sharing your tools with law enforcement. So when you look at that, I say the US government reviewed our platform for 30 months. So when there's allegations that we're a criminal organization and the Justice Department should seize our websites, the Justice Department has been on the inside. They've been investigating us for 30 months. Their unequivocal conclusion was they did not find evidence of the violation of the federal offenses, child sex abuse material, or sex trafficking. So I said, don't take it from me. Don't believe a word I'm saying. Take it from the US federal government. Because what we're doing is borne out in the efforts that can be seen by any objective and impartial observer. So I am committed to justice. I am committed that where individuals have been harmed, they will be compensated. There's no question about that. But there's a certain process that has to be followed so those claims can be assessed.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I've seen, a lot of people these days in our fast consuming culture, they read a headline and they get sensationalized by, PornHub, settles for millions of dollars to these people. So from the outside perspective, it can look like, oh yeah, they're guilty and they're just paying people off to be silent. Or, why do they cave in so easily when these lawsuits come up if they're not doing anything wrong? So what you're saying is that, yes, you have not only the moral value to take care of the victims, which is a really important component of justice, but there's also the aspect of, you could say, okay, lawsuits can take many years, as we know. So a lot of these ongoing cases, they were from before the acquisition, but nothing new has arisen regarding sex trafficking or child abuse content. To me, that's really important for the public to understand, and they can go do their research. And like you said, there are many viable places where they can make sure that's true. It's also important to note, I saw on another interview you did, when you acquired MindGeek, I believe you deleted about 8 million pieces of content.
That wasn't us. That was in early 2021. All content that did not come from unverified uploaders was removed. And that was about 8 million pieces of content that had not gone through the verified uploader process. But that's going back. Well, people, they think we've done this as brand new. This is far before us. Like I said, we wouldn't have acquired this company if this wasn't in place. That happened in the early weeks of 2021. That content was removed from public viewing to have it as it is today, that the only content that's on the site is from verified uploaders.
Okay, so oversimplified, yes, there was instances of maybe illegal or inappropriate content. It was sanitized, you're saying, about 2 years before you acquired the company. Once you acquired the company, not only have you continually sanitized it and upgraded even the safety and trust protocols, but you're actively working with law enforcement and these different advocacy groups that have the power to, like you said, take down content if someone reports that it's non-consensual, etc. People can do their own research and verify this.
Maybe this is, sort of just because I know it so well. There's no allegation that those 8 million pieces of content were themselves illegal, mostly illegal, all illegal. But the point was, we raised our standards, right? Just by the way, to be very clear, everything on YouTube today is unverified, doesn't come from verified uploaders, right? And on the vast majority, almost all other adult platforms. But what we did, it's really important, you have to learn from the past and raise your standards continuously. So that's what we did. We raised our standards. We said, look, maybe in the early days of the content creator economy, verification like this wasn't required. Or maybe, by the way, content creators didn't want to do this kind of verification. In fact, when we brought this in early 2021, the rest of the adult industry said, you are dead. Nobody is going to give their ID in order to upload content to an adult platform. And we said, it's what we're doing. We raise the standard. So it's much more about raising the standards. You talk about, and I understand you use the word sanitized, but everyone has different standards of what that means. To me, we're talking about continuously raising the standards for trust and safety, learning from challenges as they occur, and committing to getting better every day. And if you're not doing that as a platform, you're stagnating and you're not keeping the public safe.
Right, specifically within the tech space in general. But as we all know, criminals get very creative, so you always have to stay ahead of it. And like you said, there's a lot to protect beyond even exploitation. There's users' privacy and a lot of other things that need to be considered with these solutions. So one of the things I did, like I said, I've talked to various peers of mine who are also survivors of trafficking and different forms of childhood abuse. All of us are very passionate about real solutions, really doing the right thing for future generations. I refuse to allow my niece to grow up in the world that I've seen while pretending to be a child on the internet. For me, it comes down to very solvable problems that I see in general. A lot of politicians and even tech companies and influencers or public figures, there are people who talk about it. There's not enough people talking about it, in my opinion, but there are people who talk about it, but I don't see a lot of people willing to really dig in and find solutions. So again, at the beginning of this conversation, I acknowledge that I will likely receive backlash even from people that know me and know my intentions within this space, simply because of the stigma associated with the adult entertainment industry and or PornHub and or the headlines that they've read. So once again, for the avoidance of doubt, I'm never going to be marketing porn, advocating for porn, or necessarily a consumer of it. But the goal here is obviously to protect the innocent. So it's interesting that when I've talked to different survivors, a lot of them are very disillusioned by various advocacy groups that have a lot to say, but aren't doing a lot to help. Not the survivors and victims, and not the proactive solutions or safeguards. So I have a few different sort of rapid fire questions that I wanted to ask you from child trafficking survivors that I personally know and have told about this dialogue, and they had the following questions for you. Do you support the annihilation of child pornography?
We do in all its forms, but we underscore as well, there's nothing pornographic about a child. Pornography is about consensual sexual expression between adults. That's why we use the term child sex abuse material. And terms are important, by the way. It's not just us, it's law enforcement around the world. Pornography and children do not exist, should never exist in the same universe. There's nothing pornographic about a child. We absolutely not only support ideologically the complete and total annihilation of child sex abuse material, but we invest significant resources, financial, human resources, day in, day out, so that we can have a reality of an internet where child sex abuse material simply doesn't exist.
Absolutely. So Kim, in short, the answer is from both Saul and I, yes to your question.
Unequivocally, yes, absolutely. The second question is, can you pledge to do everything in your power to block, remove, and report any CSAM, child sexual abuse material, or revenge porn posted to your platforms?
Yeah, again, I'll say very clearly, the answer is yes, period. We will commit, we are committed to it. And I hope that your listeners, having heard this episode, I hope that comes through very, very clearly. I'll let Saul add, but in short, the answer is yes.
Yeah, it's an easy yes, but I say it's a yes and. It's yes and we want to work with those who have lived experience, with those who are on the front line of law enforcement, legislators, regulators, so that we can do as much as we possibly can. We see one side of the problem, right? Like I said, we own a company that made only 2,500 reports to NCMEC last year because we don't see that volume of suspected CSAM that's elsewhere online, but we can use our expertise and our tools to assist others in fighting it. So I say, that fight is not just on our platform, but it's around the world, generally online. And we're more than happy to share those resources. I always say we'll come to any conference we're invited to. We'll speak at any roundtable. I'll sit down with any law enforcement officer, any advocacy group, because this is really our raison d'etre. That is internet safety. Trust and safety is at the heart of everything we do. And we are encouraged every single day to work to abolish child sex abuse material in all its forms.
Absolutely. So we touched on this a little bit before, but the third question is, have all known victims been compensated, and appropriate actions taken to minimize and stop the spread of underage and non-consensual porn?
Yeah, so obviously, like I said, I can't comment on lawsuits that are outstanding. I'm just not allowed to. It's not something I'm permitted to do. What I'll say this, I'm committed to just outcomes. Our ownership group is committed to just outcomes. And there are two kinds of just outcomes. Number one, there can be just outcomes where individuals are compensated. I am fully committed to that. If you have been wronged by anyone, that is why we have a civil litigation system. Individuals who are wronged should absolutely and must be compensated. But just outcomes actually goes beyond individual victims. Just outcomes also involves learning from past challenges and implementing steps to improve the safety of the platform. And that's something that I live it, I breathe it, I eat it, I sleep it, because you can't rest. And one thing, I know this, by the way, in my world, I have interacted with victims and survivors of sexual abuse. And what we hear often from them is it's not just about me. It's about all the people who are not being detected and flying under the radar and are being continually victimized. So part of our pledge to support survivors of sex trafficking or child sex abuse material is to continue improving our trust and safety, not only so our platform can't be used in this regard, but so that we can be an example to the rest of the internet as to how they can prevent that, right? And you see this in terms of our partnerships with the Internet Watch Foundation, our Trusted Flagger program, our deterrence messaging, our work with law enforcement. We support victims, but we also at the same time want to ensure that no further victims are created, not on our platform, not on any other platform.
It's powerful. That's important for people to know. I absolutely agree. So the fourth question we actually already covered, but it's, what are your procedures if people request their videos or content to be taken down, even if they were originally willing participants of that content?
Yeah, the content removal request form should speak for itself. We require, through the model program, ongoing consent. And we will always work with individuals who have withdrawn consent to have their content removed from the content sharing platforms.
Absolutely. I want to thank you both and your whole team for what you're doing, because not a lot of people are aware of how rigorous the process is and how above and beyond you've gone to ensure this safety, even when it's not necessarily a profit-driven incentive. I can tell not only by the conversations we've had, but from how in-depth your intel is, your information, your data on this subject. It's a complex issue. It's not a one-size-fits-all problem. There's not a one-size-fits-all solution, but there are definitely solutions. And I definitely believe it's in coming together, it's in working with the right people, and it's in having that willingness to actually solve the problem holistically, not just put a Band-Aid on it. So looking ahead, what are some of the additional measures or technologies or incentives that PornHub or your companies are considering to enhance public safety and your platform's integrity?
So Kim, I'll first say, I hope that this is the first conversation of many that we have in public. Okay?
Absolutely.
And whether that's with you alone, or others that you bring to the table, having conversations like this is essential. We all want the same thing, which is the eradication of child sex abuse, and we need to work together in order to accomplish that. So I look forward to joining you and others for future discussions so that we can learn from one another and really push this conversation forward. That's in general. So I'm really very, very grateful to you for having us. It's interesting though, when you talk about the profit side of this, I'm two things, I think. Ideologically, I'm a civil libertarian, but I'm also a capitalist fundamentally. And I think that there is no conflict between trust and safety and commercial success. I think we live in a society where the sexual offenders are the minority and the majority of people are responsible and pro-social and want to protect children. And they will favor businesses that put their money where their mouth is when it comes to protecting kids. So when it comes to a platform like ours, when we invested in this platform, part of that thesis was, if this platform is as safe as it can possibly be, it will be as commercially successful as it can possibly be. I think the same is true though for device manufacturers like Apple, Google, and Microsoft. I think that when parents start asking these questions, what are you doing to keep my kids safe? And when kids start asking, what are you doing to keep us safe? The platforms and the device manufacturers, the operating system providers that can answer that satisfactorily will be the ones that rise above the top when it comes to commercial success. So one of the things that I like to do from an advocacy perspective is to I say this, by the way, at adult conferences, porn conferences, where I say, by following rigorous trust and safety, you will be commercially successful. That's what the public wants. That's what consenting adults want. So there's no, in any way, discrepancy between trust and safety and commercial success. When we look ahead to the future, I say sort of in three categories. Number one is tech. We have 500 plus engineers who are working every day to build amazing tools to keep our platform and the rest of the internet safe. And I hope, Kim, you and I can speak about those as they come to fruition and they come to market and they are made widely available. We'll be talking about some of those in the future, and I hope that we can, in fact, announce them using platforms just like yours. So that's on the tech side. The second part is on the partnership side. These are partnerships with organizations that share our values, whether they're organizations that are addressed at eradicating child sex abuse material, at assisting survivors, at preventing sex trafficking. We are always looking, I say, to get out of our own world and go to those who have the skills, the expertise, the knowledge in order to help advise us as to what we can do better. And then thirdly, it's about public engagement. The public has to become educated on this. The public has a role to play in taking a really firm stand when it comes to the eradication of child sex abuse material and sex trafficking. And one of our pledges when we acquired this company was to be public and open and transparent about who we are, what we believe in, and the work that we're doing. So, that's not something that you just do by posting a bio online, although all your listeners should know. When you go to my bio or Sarah's bio, which you can find easily at ethicalcapitalpartners.com, you'll find our email addresses, or you'll find our professional backgrounds. We're easy to reach. So it's about being accessible, because we don't have all of the solutions at our fingertips. We need to learn from those who have the expertise. So that openness and that transparency, that brings the conversation into the public forum like we're doing today, and we're committed to doing that on an ongoing basis.
Kim, I'll pick up on that last one in Saul's list, mostly because I think it links a lot to the work that you do. One of the things that was so surprising and refreshing when we first met was that you believe that talking about things, difficult things, exposing yourself, like making yourself incredibly vulnerable and telling your story, that was one of the things that when we first met was so refreshing to us, was that you too, coming from a very different place than we come from, but that shared idea that information, education, both people wanting that information and people giving that information. There has to be a listener and a teller of stories. And Kim, one of the things that you've really shown us through the work you're doing is that stories have to be told. People don't just want to go and look on a website and see all this information about your trust and safety. They don't want to just read about, all these things we do. This is the tech. This is how it works. They want to know about the people behind these things. So we have to make ourselves, in order to be able to ensure that people are educated, that people can hear that a story is being told. And that's a place of vulnerability. Saul and I have to come onto these shows. We have to work in maybe some scarier environments. It's a lot easier for us to be in a boardroom. We're private equity. Saul is a lawyer. I come from government. The place that we're comfortable is in offices and in boardrooms. And sometimes you have to put yourself out there. And so I'll just say, to that last point that Saul made, when your question about what do we do next, we have to keep doing what we're doing, because we can talk to one person and only one person will hear it. We have to go into places where people are having these conversations so that more and more people can hear the story. But we can't just rely on a social media post or a news article. We have to put ourselves out there so that people can see. It's a lot easier when you see someone with your own eyes telling that story. What's your gut feeling about this? And I think, Kim, that's one of the things that you and I have been, and Saul and the three of us have been talking about, is we had to come on the show. We had to come in and take those questions, because if we didn't, it was just going to be yet another company with a website, putting up words on a website, on an owned channel, if you will. So communication, really emphasizing on Saul's third point, which is, what do we got to do? We got to keep telling the story, because there's so much misinformation out there. And the only way that you can battle misinformation is with information. So that's really a big part of what we're going to do in the next year, is just, we got to keep pounding the pavement. We got to keep telling people what the facts are about this industry, that there are individuals, adults, that are consuming legal content, and there are adults creating adult content. That's the work we do, but we can't stop there. We know that there are criminals who want to use our platforms. We know that there are criminals that want to use the internet as a whole, and we can't just put our heads in the sand and say, well, that's not the work we do. We're very much in this adult space. We need to be at the table as well, because it is naive to think that criminals aren't very organized. That's why they call it organized crime. They're organized, and they're coming after all of our sites. They're coming after our children, our families. And so we can't just put ourselves in this, all we do is adult content. We know that we have to be a part of a larger conversation, because people who want to do bad things on the online world and in the real world are going to use all platforms, all available platforms. So communications is so important. Sort of on Saul's third point, just want to reiterate, communications and telling the facts and sharing the facts, so important to us.
Absolutely. I have huge respect for your approach, and I've been very impressed with the fact that you're not only soliciting this type of dialogue, but you're wanting to bring others in, third parties in, because it's one thing for you to say, we're great, you can trust us. It's different for you to bring in Crime Stoppers and NCMEC and ICMIC and all these different organizations who can do their own verification process, validate whether or not it's actually legitimately helpful or whether or not there are gaps, but also work with organizations like mine, with survivors, with people that are doing the real work on the front lines. What are the ongoing problems? How can we actually solve this on a broader perspective? So I would like to see more organizations not only collaborate to work together with solutions, but also be more open-minded about, we don't have to agree. Like you said, I don't have to like porn or ever watch it, but I can absolutely throw my hat in to protect future generations of children that should never have to be exploited or even witness adult content. So again, I'm asking the audience to not only have an open mind, but to understand where we're coming from and what the intent of not only this dialogue, but this effort really is. I also want to invite anybody who has feedback, ideas, input. Like I said earlier, you can email me directly, contact@unitingamericainc.org. If you have a complaint, if you want to send hate mail, I just want you to know that we're actually here to solve problems, and you are welcome to do so. I won't get offended by silly things. However, if it's a legitimate concern or complaint, I will look into it. If it hasn't been addressed, we will address it. I promise you that. I commit to not only bringing the public through this transparent journey with me as I go through this trust and safety process, as I go through and verify and validate, as I work with other experts in the fields of technology, with other survivors, with law enforcement, with political realms. I want the public to know that this is a serious effort. It's not just a let's cover up the past and pretend everything's pretty. No, we're here to actually dig into the problems, understand them holistically, and provide holistic solutions. So again, I want to thank you both and your entire team, not only for the willingness and the desire, but how proactive you've already been. And I think it's rather ironic actually, but I hope that you will be some of the very first of these big tech companies to lead by example. And it's going to be kind of fun to call out some of these other, non-adult content sites that aren't leading by example and who actually have a lot of really harmful content on their platforms. Because if PornHub can do it, Google certainly can and should. If PornHub and Ethical Capital Partners is also supporting work like ours to not only rescue and rehabilitate child trafficking survivors, to raise awareness about the problem and to actually implement solutions, I would love to see the other people with big opinions do the same thing, because we can all work together. We don't have to agree about lifestyle and adult choices. Hopefully, no one will disagree that protecting children and innocence should always be the priority. If we keep that value in mind, we can absolutely come together and accomplish those things within our lifetime.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. And again, I think I've said it a few times now, but also thanks for sticking with us. This is a long commitment. This is a long game. We know that keeping the internet safe, because of the realities of the evolving internet, this is not easy and it's not quick work. But so, Kim, I know we're coming to a close here. I just wanted to, again, thank you for your patience with us, for sticking by us and really trying to find a way to make our partnership work. So just thanks so much for everything you're teaching us and showing us through your own experience, but also through the work that you're doing. It's really been important to Saul and I to not stay in a bubble, to be open, but also we need people who are willing to hold our hand through this. So thanks so much, Kim, for everything you've done for us as well.
Absolutely. Thank you both again. I really enjoyed this dialogue. Hopefully it's the first of many. I would love to also bring other advocates and groups together. So let's do a lot more of these discussions. Thank you again. We'll see you next time.